Hello. The battlefields of the 41st millennium are crisscrossed by the track marks of a great many vehicles. Some have strange and esoteric designs, others are a little bit more familiar. In the forces of the Imperium, a great many belong to the Astra Militarum, but there are a couple that have stood the test of time longer than any others, and perhaps unsurprisingly, they both belong to the Space Marines. The Rhino is one, a trustworthy, capable tank that's chassis has formed the basis of a great many variants. But the other, well, that is a beast of a completely different nature. From the very beginning of Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader, you could field a Land Raider, a tough, uncompromising battle tank that wouldn't look out of place at a monster truck rally. So how did this machine of destruction, the battle tank of the 41st millennium, become one of the flagships of the Space Marine land fleet? I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and for the next 10 minutes or so, we're exploring the development history of the Land Raider. Shortly before the first edition of Warhammer 40,000, the book called Rogue Trader was released. It was previewed in issue 93 of White Dwarf, and in that preview there were some amazing visuals that would set the tone for the game that was about to change the world. From the John Sibbick cover on the cover to the Will Reese pieces in the article itself, as well as the writing, this is a fantastic preview of the dark millennium to come. But alongside this incredible art, there are amazing miniatures to spy too. If you can draw your eye away from the impressive sight of an advancing line of LE2 Space Marine models, then you will find something hidden in the background, something massive, monstrous, and magnificent. The first ever Land Raider. In the Rogue Trader book, there would be an explanation for this incredible machine, along with rules for using one in your games. The Land Raider is a multi-role combat vehicle designed to cope with most situations that the galaxy can throw at it. Its wide tracks can move easily over loose or dangerous ground, while its plastine encased body can hold up to 10 crew in relative comfort. Weapons carried as standard are 2 las cannons and 1 bolter. The las cannons are mounted in ball turrets on either side of the vehicle. Each las cannon is able to fire within a 180-degree arc measured from the center line. The bolter is forward firing. Equipment carried as standard includes targeters for the las cannons and auto drive. The model that was shown in the Rogue Trader book was the same one that you could see in that impressive White Dwarf preview article, and even though you could play with a Land Raider, you couldn't buy one, at least not yet. In the first proper supplement released for this burgeoning science fantasy war game, the Book of the Astronomicon, there was a section of letters from hobbyists. One such letter was written by someone called Timothy Box, and they wanted to know what the monstrous vehicle was that they could see in the background of those preview images. And Rick Priestley provided an enlightening reply. We do have plans to produce more vehicles. There are many technical problems associated in casting large kits in white metal, not the least being the cost. So although vehicles will appear in metal, these will be the smaller varieties, such as bikes, 2-man hoverers, and the like. Plastic kits are unfortunately very expensive to design, so we can't do very many. Bob Naismith, model Supremo and extremely Scottish person, and the man with no name, who sometimes answers to the title John THORNTHWAITE, have overcome this dual problem in a rather unique way. John has designed a large tracked vehicle with separate hatches and hardpoints for weapons. Bob, meanwhile, has designed a multitude of metal hatches and weapons to fit the plastic recesses. The result is the best of both worlds, a complete range of plastic vehicles. In addition, we have a completed plastic kit of the Land Raider under production. The unnamed large tracked vehicle with separate hatches is presumably the soon-to-be ubiquitous Rhino, but calling out the pre-production on the Land Raider, a vehicle people had already seen and fallen in love with, well, that was a very welcome promise indeed. Brian Ansell had long been interested in moving Games Workshop towards more plastic production, which is why he hired John THORNTHWAITE in the first place, a plastics expert who had formerly worked at Matchbox making cars. Together with Bob Naismith, they were looking to develop cost-effective solutions for these new kits. Early experiments like the Fighting Fantasy and Psycho-Styrene Dwarves had been interesting but not especially successful case studies, but it was the Slaughter base that had been the biggest plastic win so far. Multi-part kits like the Skeletons for Warhammer and then the RTB-01 Imperial Space Marines for 40k were the breakthrough successes that GW needed. The huge cost required to produce these plastic kits still meant that they had to look for those innovative solutions though. For that reason, the bigger vehicles like the Rhino and Land Raider were designed as symmetrical models, so you could mirror the sprues and reduce the number of injection molding tools that you would need to pay for. Fittingly, for one of the first plastic tanks being developed for 40k, the Land Raider took real-world inspiration from what historian David Fletcher describes as the first tank there ever was, the British Mark I. The British Mark I was first built in 1916, and a total of just 150 were manufactured, seeing service throughout the First World War, after having first been deployed at the Somme. Like most British tanks of the era, it was a rhomboid shape, with tracks that run all the way around the body of the vehicle. A total of 8 crew were required to man it, 4 to drive the tank, and 4 to work the guns. Evolving slightly from Dave Andrews' original scratch-built design, in its production model the Land Raider still took many design cues from the Mark I, most obviously its broad shape, tracks and sponson-mounted guns. The Land Raider though was a little bit boxier, with a smaller nose and taller profile. Despite this, it was possible in-game for the Land Raider to carry 10 troops in addition to its crew, so I imagine a lot of Marines had to sit in each other's laps like they were going on a family trip to the beach. It's not clear if it was the original visual representation of the Land Raider or not, but we do know that in Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader, the model of the Land Raider that was featured in the photography was a scratch-built tank created by Dave Andrews. Andrews has worked at Games Workshop for more or less 40 years, and his contribution to their games and their worlds has been incalculable. In the early days, Dave Andrews produced art like the Ultramarines image, and They Shall Know No Fear, for White Dwarf 98. He created designs for many of the card buildings seen in sets like the Terror of the Lichmaster, and his cartography depicted Warhammer's known world in one of its earliest complete maps. Famously, he appeared in the Warhammer Armies book alongside his mighty Bretonnian army. If you've ever been to the Partisan historical wargaming show, there's a good chance that you've seen one of his many remarkable battle boards. But his modelling ingenuity evidently dates back a long way, as apparently he was even using stuff like pen tops in order to make the track links in the scratch-built Land Raider model. First released as RTB-05, the 5th box set for Rogue Trader, the Land Raider kit was credited to the Citadel design team, which could mean that anyone from Bob Naismith to John THORNTHWAITE to Dave Andrews was involved in the actual sculpting and design of the final plastics. The box set actually featured 2 full tanks, even though there were no shared sprues, and it came at a cost of £12.99, which would make it about £37 today for 2 Land Raiders. The RTB-05 box art was provided by Angus Fieldhouse, a painter who worked on several Games Workshop products and provided covers for White Dwarf. Soon enough, the RTB-05 box was replaced by RTB-11, featuring the same cover art but with brand new branding. This new box only had enough sprues to create 1 Land Raider tank, and there was a slight bump in the price, making each one £6.99. Because these were amongst the only vehicle kits available for 40k at the time, the rules and branding made it clear that it wasn't just Space Marines who made use of them in battle. As Imperial Land Raiders, you'd find plenty of the battle tanks lining up alongside the Imperial Army, later to become the Imperial Guard. You could also see looted Land Raiders in the armies of the Eldar Harlequins, presumably repainted in glorious checkerboard patterns with glam hairdos sticking out of the hatches and portholes. There were also early variants of the tank too. In White Dwarf 119, Kit Basher and Converter Extraordinaire, and later Forge World head honcho, Tony Cottrell, would provide extensive guidance on rebuilding your standard Land Raider kit with Rhino parts to make a Spartan pattern variant, a tank that would later become closely associated with the events of the Horus Heresy. In White Dwarf issue 129 from September 1990, there would be a new article all about the Land Raider. It would provide a datafax with new stats and rules for use, as well as a new bit of fluff that explained the origins and development of the tank, including a brand new reason that it was called the Land Raider. The STC for the Land Raider was rediscovered by Fabricator General, later referred to as an Adeptus Mechanicus techno-archaeologist, called Arkan Land, hence the name Land's Raider. No such lore had been present to explain the name back in the earliest Rogue Trader days though, and it seems quite likely that it was mostly just a fun pun on the famous British off-road vehicle, the Land Rover. Around 1993, the Land Raider box was updated again, this time for the second edition of 40k. In keeping with the rest of the range, a photograph replaced the classic art. Excitingly, you could now field a Land Raider in even more second edition forces, including Chaos, Squats, and Gene Stealers, though apparently the Eldar Harlequins had thought better of it by then. Even though it would continue to be a viable option for Space Marine army building in the second edition of 40k, and it would still be produced for epic scale games, the actual Land Raider kit stopped production at some point in the 90s. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when that was, but it stopped appearing in catalogues after 1991. Why exactly it stopped production isn't clear either. The rumour that I had heard in the 90s was that the mould, or the metal tooling that was used to actually create the plastic sprues, had been broken, that someone had dropped it, or it had been compromised in some way. But that was never confirmed at the time. And I actually asked that question to the man with no name himself, aka John THORNTHWAITE, who was responsible for Games Workshop's plastic production during the 90s, and he didn't remember anything like that happening. I can't let you go, actually, just without asking a quick question about something you mentioned earlier, because there's a persistent rumour about the Land Raider kit, that original Land Raider kit, that it was only in production for a brief amount of time because something happened to the mould or the tool. It was damaged in some way. Do you remember that at all, or is that just one of these rumours out there?
No. One of the things about the tools I made, or made in my period, they, I would say, are guaranteed for at least 1 million runs.
Wow.
You'd have to do some real damage. If you just ran it normally, you'd have no problems.
Whatever the reason that the original Land Raider was discontinued in the mid-90s, it remained an iconic and highly sought-after kit. New hope came in 1997, when Epic 40,000 got a brand new version of the Land Raider at its epic scale, the Mark II. But it would still be 3 more years before 40k players would get to enjoy Land Raiders on their tabletops. Sculptor Jez Goodwin had started working on a redesigned Land Raider as early as 1995, but it wouldn't be until the year 2000 that the new 40k 28mm scale Land Raider would actually be released. The Mark III took many design cues from the original Land Raider, as well as that Tony Cottrell Spartan Land Raider conversion, and it took on proportions that were much closer to the original British Mark I tank, even though everything had been sci-fied up even more than ever. I am all out of time for Land Raider history right now, but if you want to see more videos like this and find out how 7th City Collectibles helped me get hold of this retro Land Raider for my summer Space Marine Army project, then you can check out my other videos here on the channel and go to patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery, where I've got loads more articles and videos, interviews, and exclusive content all about Warhammer history. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.